And I want to thank also the committee that's responsible for this year's lineup. It's been an outstanding season. Emily Swanson, Valerie Howe, Peg Watt, Missy Sauls, thank you so much for getting us through an enriching and fascinating discussion this year. Tonight, we're going to talk about two seeming opposites, nature and technology. And we are born of nature, and yet we seem to set ourselves apart from it as much as we can. In fact, we spend 93% of our time indoors, and most of that time is connected to something like this smartphone. In fact, the average American spends really 12 hours a day viewing some sort of device, whether it's this phone, a computer, a television, and that comes at a cost because we run the risk of perceiving nature as at best an abstraction or even forgetting about it altogether. So how do we close that gap between nature and our technological lives? And in fact, can we use technology to bring us closer to nature, to comprehend it, to appreciate it, to ultimately love it? Our own experience at the aquarium suggests that we can. We've spent a lot of time over these past few years actually getting folks out into nature, conducting beach sweeps, doing seining expeditions, connecting folks through oyster restoration work, and seeing sea turtles released back out to sea. But we've also discovered the power of technology. And last year, we had more than 1,000 viewers through live streams across all social platforms, participating in our educational programs, watching dolphins feed in the wild, watching sea turtles make that majestic and emotional trek back out into the ocean. And I want to give a quick plug because if you haven't already, I encourage you to think about becoming a sea turtle guardian and joining a community of folks that have subscribed to our services, receiving exclusive online content, and learning more about our programs and how we go to great lengths to save species from extinction. Tonight, we're going to be deploying both low-tech and high-tech technology. So for our Q&A session at the very end, if you have questions, you're welcome to go back to the back of the room. There are Post-it notes. Write your questions down, put them on a little board back there. Or conversely, if you have one of these smartphones, go to hashtag HLLfinale using Twitter or Facebook and give us your questions in that format. Here to open our minds this evening is acclaimed author Richard Louv. And Richard's works have been translated and published in 24 countries and helped launch really an international movement to reconnect families and children and people back to nature. He's perhaps best known for his work, his book, Last Child in the Woods, in which he coined the phrase nature deficit disorder. And I'm sure he'll be talking about that tonight. Richard is well distinguished. He received the Audubon Medal in 2008, joining a very select company that includes E.O. Wilson, Rachel Carson, and President Jimmy Carter. And more recently, he was a visiting lecturer and scholar at the Clemson University, where he received the Cox Award, which is that university's highest honor for sustained achievement in public service. He's the chairman and co-founder of the Children and Nature Network. And so joining us fittingly by Skype tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce Richard Louv.
Richard, go ahead.
So I'm there now because
You're
I can't see any of you. But
Richard, you may begin and we will work on the video from our side.
all right, okay. So, well, first, I'm very glad to talk to you. I'm looking forward to seeing you. I've been aware of some of the things being done in your area. There seem to be areas around the country that are considered, that I would consider to be really epicenters of the Children and Nature movement. And I think from what I've been reading recently in the Charleston paper and elsewhere, Charleston is certainly one of those. Um, Programs like Green Heart Project, Y2O, the Youth to Oceans, Lob Lolly Adventures, the Coastal Expeditions in South Carolina, Outdoor Education Fund, the Boeing Center for Children's Wellness. There's so much more that is certainly the Charleston County Parks and Rec Commission, and of course the South Carolina Aquarium. I think one of the interesting things is the role that aquariums can play along with zoos and botanical gardens and arboreta. They can play a hugely important role as the convener of a regional campaign, regional efforts to connect kids to nature. And that certainly is what the aquarium is doing today. I was asked to talk a little bit about what I call the hybrid mind. What I mean by that is the best way to explain that is I met a guy who teaches people how to become the pilots of cruise ships. We need a few good pilots of cruise ships. And he said that he gets two kinds of students. One kind of student grew up outdoors, and the other kind grew up indoors mostly. The kind of student who grew up on couches playing video games and in front of computers, he said, as someone teaching people how to become the pilots of cruise ships, I need that kind of student. That kind of student has skills and abilities that I need. That kind of student is really good at electronics, and I have a lot of electronics on my ships. He said the other kind of student grew up more outside, hiking and fishing, or maybe on a farm out of an agricultural area. He said that kind of student who spent more time outdoors also has skills and abilities that I need. He said that kind of student can actually tell where the ship is. And he wasn't being facetious. He was being literal. He said, the kind of student who grows up mainly connected to electronics, some of their senses have atrophied, particularly their spatial senses. But in his experience, at least, the kind of student who spent more time outdoors, that kind of student can actually tell where the ship is. And again, he wasn't being facetious. He was saying that kind of student can tell when the ship is too close to the dock. They have a sense, many senses, of what's happening on that ship. The next thing he said is the most interesting. He said that his ideal student would be the kind of student who has both sets of skills and abilities, both the skills and abilities that come from the virtual world, from electronics, and the digital aspects of our life, and the skills that come from the real, particularly outdoors in nature. He said that would be his ideal student who has both sets of abilities, both ways of knowing the world. I call that the hybrid mind, and I believe that the future actually belongs to people with hybrid minds. In terms of what's been happening to our kids, I want to make very clear, I'm not anti-tech. The things I've written are not anti-tech. Sometimes I get misinterpreted that way. But there's a meme or a slogan that goes throughout the book, throughout the Nature Principle, the second of the 3 books I've done on nature deficit disorder. And that slogan, bumper sticker, is the more high-tech our lives become, the more nature we need. It's a kind of equation. It's about balance. And it's literally about balance. It's literally a neurological balance. Many of the people who are studying these issues, finally, the people who are studying human behavior and child development and cognitive functioning among children have finally, within the last 15 years, begun to look at the effect of the natural world on that development. And some of the people who study this, for instance, the a couple researchers, they're a man and wife researchers. Their last name is Kaplan, and they've been doing good work on this for a long time. They talk about how when we spend too much time doing what they call directed attention, that's the kind of attention we pay when we're focused only on our computer or on the desk work in front of us. When we spend too much of our time doing that, I'm sure many of you have felt this also, we burn out. It's very hard to concentrate after a while. It's a kind of fatigue that is specific to that kind of attention. They say, the Kaplans say, the best way to recover our attention, recover from that kind of burnout, is to pay a different kind of attention. And they call this, in a technical sense, it's an interesting word for a technical term. They call it fascination attention. That's when we're so immersed in something, we aren't particularly aware of it directly, but it's immersed, it's permeating us, we're in it. And they say if you pay that kind of attention just for a little while, then the burnout that comes from too much directed attention goes away. And they say that the best place to pay that kind of fascination attention is in nature. And so more high-tech our lives become, and they will become more high-tech, the more nature we need to balance some of the effects of electronics. Again, I'm not anti-tech. Enormously great things are being done with technology, with connecting people to nature. So certainly, the aquarium has wonderful tools that you use to connect your visitors to nature. Many of your schools do also. But the question is balance. One of the ironies is that, well, first, I want to tell you a little bit about the first story that I mentioned. The people who study the human senses no longer talk about 5 senses. They talk conservatively about 9 or 10 senses, and some of them talk about as many as 30 senses, and they all have names. Many of them are spatial senses, but we have some of the abilities of bats to use echolocation. Some people who have lost their sight are learning how to use echolocation. We have the ability to track a trail through the woods just with our nose. The studies of that were done using university students, of course, college students as guinea pigs, and they had them get down on their hands and knees, and they literally tracked a scent trail through the forest. And the people studying these students, when they did this, noticed that these students who could track that trail, blindfolded and ears plugged all the way through the forest, these students did something that all animals do who make their living with their noses. They zigzagged as they followed the trail. This is part of this. This is intuitively part of us. This is part of our biology. Some people have theories about that. One of them I just mentioned, the attention retention theory of the Kaplans. But there's also E.O. Wilson, who at Harvard, whose biophilia hypothesis holds that we are hardwired genetically as a species to have an affiliation with the rest of nature. When we don't get enough of it, we don't do so well. What's been happening in our schools and in our lives, though, is we have been creating, and again, I'm not anti-tech, it's a question of balance. We've been creating environments for our kids and ourselves in our schools and at home and at work, of course, in which we and our kids spend more and more time staring at the screen and or staring at our iPhone or iPad. When you think about it, when you use an iPad or a screen like this, you are spending a lot of energy blocking out as many as 30 senses as you can in order to focus on that screen to allegedly go anywhere in the world through the internet. Now, if we're creating environments in our schools, in our homes, in which we and our kids are expending that much energy, a huge amount of energy, blocking out all those senses to narrow it down to just 2 or 3. That to me is the very definition of being less alive. Now, what teacher wants their child to be less alive? What parent wants their child to be less alive? This really is a question about being fully alive. The people who are in charge of the technology industries know this. It's interesting that so many of the leaders in Silicon Valley have cabins up in the forest near Silicon Valley that are off the grid where they go to get recharged, literally recharged. And they get off, they don't use their electronic gadgets as much up there. They go there deliberately to be recharged by nature. And then they come back and they're better programmers and they're better at their businesses. They know that. Steve Jobs did not allow his small child to play with the iPad. It turns out Bill Gates was a similar kind, or is a similar kind of parent. He's determined to have his kids have some nature in their lives, or as much as he can. His compound in Seattle, right on Lake Washington, is filled with natural settings. It's a beautiful place, has a stream running through it. Now, he made sure that his kids had that for them. We're still working on him and others to pay attention to what other kids need, that other kids need that too, particularly kids in inner cities, particularly kids who don't have that kind of access. Increasingly, schools and programs of all kinds are paying attention to the benefits to cognitive functioning, to physical health, to mental health that nature experience gives them. It doesn't have to be in Yosemite. It can be in a densely populated urban neighborhood. There are ways to do this through design, through programs. The schools that have been greened, and by that I don't mean solar panels. I mean literally greened. There are perhaps a school garden, a vegetable garden, or a native plant garden on the school site, a natural play space. Nature brought into the school, kids going out on field trips to natural areas or to places like the aquarium. Those schools that have been greened do better on testing. 2 recent studies, one in Massachusetts, over 900 schools, and they factored out all the socioeconomic issues that would throw this off. They compared the kids and their grades in schools that had been greened in that way to the kids who were in schools that were more typical. The kids in the schools that have been greened did better on standardized testing, Similar study being done in Chicago on about 900, I'm sorry, it's 400 schools in urban Chicago. They're finding exactly the same thing. This has not been published yet, but their preliminary findings suggest that greening the school have as much or more positive impact on kids' grades and their educational experience as anything that was tried during the No Child Left Behind era, which suggests to me, and it always has, that if we really want education reform, we'll have No Child Left Inside campaign. The people doing that Chicago story, by the way, are the same folks who did some of the early research on attention deficit disorder. And they found some 12, 13 years ago, they found that the kids with the symptoms of attention deficit disorder who had just a little bit of contact with nature, just a walk through trees in an urban park, that their symptoms began to be relieved. Just a walk through urban trees in a park. And these are kids as young as 5 years old. The symptoms got better. Now, some kids really do have some kind of neurological issue that can be called attention deficit disorder, but too many kids, and pediatricians will tell you this, too many kids are being prescribed Ritalin who really need something else. I really applaud the aquarium and all of the great things being done in your region. I thought it was a great article, by the way, in the Charleston newspaper recently, listing some of the many things that you've been doing as a region. I want to add, before ending, that this is a special issue. There are very few issues, maybe no other issue, left in America that brings people together into the same room who don't necessarily want to be there. That means that this issue of connecting kids to nature transcends political barriers, transcends religious barriers. I can't tell you how many people who have, told me they want to tell me about the treehouse they had when they were kids. That special place in nature that they went and found something bigger. And it doesn't matter what their religion or politics were, they want to tell me that story. And they don't want to be in the last generation where that's considered natural and expected and normal. So the extent of the work that you're doing as parents, as educators, as people who work in the aquarium or in the museums of Charleston, I do believe that you're doing sacred work in the broadest sense of that word. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard.
Richard, thank you for that eloquent introduction to tonight's topic. I hope you could hear that applause from your living room. It's now my pleasure to introduce someone who many of you already recognize, Dave Williams. Dave is the chief meteorologist for ABC News 4. And Dave received his BS in atmospheric science from The Ohio State University, and he's a member of the National Weather Association and the American Meteorological Society. He serves as a board member of the Low Country STEM Collaborative, which is a remarkable nonprofit organization advancing science, technology, engineering, and math literacy among the children of our community. So Dave, thank you for that leadership. Please join me in welcoming our moderator for this evening, Dave Williams.
Well, thank you for that. I just have to say thank you for having me at this event this evening, because I really am a scientist at heart, and this really speaks to me, and I'm very glad to be here and able to share the evening with you. So we're going to go ahead and introduce our panelists at this point. Our first panelist is Danni Washington. Dani. She's the TV, go ahead, thank you. And she is the TV host of Nature Knows Best on the Fox network. She's also the co-founder of the nonprofit organization Big Blue and You, which is dedicated to inspiring and educating youth about marine conservation through the arts. She has nearly a decade of experience in the science media arena. Next up is Scott Snyder. And Scott is a natural history filmmaker. He's traveled around the world as a cinematographer. Many of you in the room are familiar with his work, as it's been featured on National Geographic, Discovery, Animal Planet, PBS, the History Channel, and many, many more. Before launching Half Moon Productions, Scott was part of the Critter Cam team, which deployed specialized cameras to better understand animals. Next up, we have Brad Krey. And Brad is joining us all the way from California. He has nearly 20 years of experience in the interpretive field and currently manages California State Parks Port Program, or it is the Parks Online Resources for Teachers and Students. I like port better. This program connects 50,000 K through 12 students annually to the California State Parks through high-quality video conferencing. So now we're going to do some questions. Everybody turned on?
I think we're turned on.
Test.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and dive right into it. And I want to get your thoughts on Louv's hybrid mind theory. Danny, what did you think about what he had to say?
Well, I really love what Richard was talking about because it resonates so much with me personally. As a child growing up in Miami, I was close to nature, but not. We were a very urbanized city. And, but as a kid, I remember distinctly being at home and just running to get outside after school, to be with my friends and to go play and to climb trees. And that I remember changing around 6 or 7 years old when Nintendo was created, right? And I got my very first Nintendo. I'm talking about the one where you had to blow the little cartridges, that was my thing. And I loved my Super Mario game and all of that. But at the same time, I remember that calling to the outdoors was always ever present, and it never, went away. So I was grateful for that early learning and being able to have access to get outside. And I think it's translated throughout my entire life. I definitely see myself as one of those hybrid thinkers because no matter what I do, no matter how far I get pulled into technology, which I love, there's still that calling to be outside. And so that's translated in so many different ways throughout my life. And, I'm grateful for having parents that were really deliberate about getting me outdoors as well. My mom is actually here with me today, Michelle. Wave, Mom. And we've always been that type of family to find that balance, especially being from the islands. So I love that, and I think that if we can continue to share that message of how do we create this next generation of young people who have both sides and are able to utilize both sides of their mind, that's so important moving forward.
Definitely, thank you. And Scott, what did you think?
I mean, I agree very much with it as well. It's one of those situations where kids today, they're so exposed to technology and screens. They're ever present. I've got 3 girls, and we make a big effort to make sure, whether it's vacations or just a constant outdoor experience on boats and surfing or whatever it is, we're outdoors quite a bit. But there is that sense that added sort of more than just a couple of senses. The way that you learn when you are fully engaged, there's no question that that's a drastically different thing than just reading something over, which is fantastic. Again, like he said, I'm not anti either, but I anti-technology. But I very much value that hands-on, in the field, dynamic, sort of the unpredictability. And that's just sort of backyard or park types of things. Another example would be working, in a location that say you're working with bears, and salmon, or you're on foot, in a park that has lions or something like that. There is no question that you are firing on every possible cylinder in those moments. I mean, you're not sleepy. You're fully engaged in the environment. You're fully engaged with the world around you, and alert in a way that you just don't get walking through, the backyard park or something. So, there's a scale to that. But there's I as far as hybrid mind, I feel like you have to have some of that natural exposure, a lot of it, and then of course you have to have a lot of knowledge and everything you get through technology. So
Absolutely, and it's kind of like learning a foreign language. You don't learn the foreign language unless you're immersed into that culture, and then boom, you just pick it right up.
Exactly.
So it's the experience around it. And Brad, what are you thinking?
I think you've got to look at how are, especially younger people, going to be exposed to these things that you want them to do, to go out into nature, to go walk through the woods. And unfortunately, they're going to be accessing that information or content through that screen. So I feel like we're overlooking that fact that technology enhances that and provides those opportunities for people to know what's out there in the great world. And especially when Richard talks about K-12 and how students may be looking or just staring at screens, as he calls it. I wouldn't call it staring at screens. I would call it using tools that are relevant for young people to consume or engage with content. And so I feel like of course, I'm a nature lover myself. I'm an ocean goer, and I do get burned out at times. But I feel like we need to use technology in the most meaningful ways to put that content where younger people are. And unfortunately, how do you get that out there now? It's through a screen. So I feel like there is a balance that we need to strike.
Thinking of it more like a portal, right? So
Right.
it's not really a block or a hindrance. It's a portal. It's
Right.
somewhere to get this generation into that space and to feel comfortable and say, hey, I kind of have an idea of what I'm going to expect when I get to be outside at some point. And I think that's really powerful.
And that's why our program, which delivers live video conferences from parks into classrooms, is just like you saw here with Richard, except it's with 30 students who may know nothing about a redwood forest because they live 600 miles away in California. So to give them the most meaningful content while they're staring at that screen is really important.
No, I think you'll like the next one because instead of talking about Louv's theory, we're going to talk a little bit more about each of you. So, Danny, what inspired you to really enter this field?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, growing up in Florida was really special. We have access to obviously amazing beaches, warm, welcoming places like that, the mangroves, the Everglades, all these natural ecosystems that I fell in love with at a very early age. Now that wasn't just because of my family, but it was also because of a lot of mentors that I interacted with, especially in high school. And through those teachers and mentors that I met, we went on several field trips, had a chance to work on a project where we went from Lake Kissimmee, Lake Okeechobee in the Kissimmee River, all the way down to Florida Bay, where we camped at distinct spots and saw the whole flow, the water flow in southern Florida. And that was really a life-changing experience because I got to see firsthand what the natural world, what Florida's natural ecosystem looked like and how it used to flow and all of those things. So that was my first intro to that. But after that point, in high school, I decided, well, I really want to take this to the next step. I want to study marine biology, right? Because I found that I loved the ocean and life in the ocean. But when I got there, it was very clear to me that there were not other people who looked like me, right? And I hadn't seen anyone either visibly, as whether on TV or through my research online. Like, I couldn't find an African American marine biologist. And so there was a decision I had to make. Was I going to say, oh, I'm just going to not do this because I don't see anyone who looks like me, or am I going to try to be one of the first, or break that barrier down? And I chose the latter. So. It's been an awesome and interesting journey, but also a very challenging journey because of the learning curve and understanding that, when you want to break down barriers, when you want to be a trailblazer, you will meet a lot of challenges. And that's been the case. But fast forward to now, after many experiences around the world, I'm proud to say that I'm the first African-American female to host her own science television show on national television. And for me, it's just such a blessing to be in this position. Thank you. Thank you. And it wasn't possible by myself. I mean, it was all because of a tribe of people who believed in me and saw the vision and saw that I could be that representative that could, show a young girl or young man out there that it's possible for them too. And that to me is my biggest role, really, in why I'm doing what I'm doing. And also on top of that, I love our planet and I love nature, and I want to share that with people. So that's what I would compose my job to be in a nutshell.
Awesome. So, Scott, how did you get to this stage this evening?
I was exposed early on constantly to the outdoors through vacations and through fishing with my father, and generally speaking, loads and loads of outdoor events. So that sort of became very common, weekend thing, very common summers and vacations and all those sorts of things. And on a bigger scale than just a day trip, a lot of times we'd go on trips. My father didn't like to go on vacations where there were a lot of lines on the map. He wanted to go to the big areas that didn't have that and explore. And kind of muddle our way around, and a lot of things always went wrong, and you had to fix those, and you had to deal with the elements, and you had to deal with a ton of unknowns, and I didn't necessarily appreciate it at the time, but it was one of those that over time I really, really appreciate everything that I've, sort of the base knowledge that I picked up through that constant exposure to the great stuff and things that go wrong, in wild scenarios, the unpredictability. So, I took the bait as far as all that goes. It was definitely a natural part of, but as far as television and getting into all of that, that happened later. After school, after college, it dawned on me that it wasn't just I don't know, a wealthy person filming a exotic trip somewhere. There's actually a business, there's an industry for natural history filmmaking, and I, for the first time had an exact bullseye on where I wanted to go, and never stopped chasing it since then.
And I bet with some of the uncertainties you talk about, you've got some pretty good bloopers too.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. And there's, we won't even go there right now, but there's a laundry list of crazy scenarios you find yourself in for sure.
Awesome. And Brad?
Well, first of all, I want to say how honored I am to be on the stage with both of you, and you as well, Dave. Like many of you, I hope you want to grow up and save the world, right? And that's what I wanted to do. And so I moved to California about 25 years ago and started working for California State Parks and got into the ranger world. So I'm in the interpretive ranger track, so I do all the education. And so I've always been looking for different ways to tell stories of California State Parks resources. I've done exhibit design and panel writing, and I've always tried to incorporate new technology because I feel like, I personally am a digital immigrant. I'm not sure if the group is familiar with digital immigrant versus digital native, but as I look out on the audience here, I see a lot of digital immigrants and a few digital natives. But I realized that as a digital immigrant, the way that I wanted to tell the story wasn't maybe always the best way a story could be told, especially for a younger audience. And so around the same time that I was doing some work with interpretive technologies, our department came up with this concept of using technology to engage with California's K-12 audience. There's 3.1 million students in California's public schools. And right now, only about 200,000 of them will actually visit a state park. So what about all the rest? What do they know? What are they going to learn about California state parks? So that's where we came up with this distance learning idea. And really, I guess I'm on this stage because of that program, but it's because of the vision of California State Parks to try something different, to engage a wider, more diverse audience, and now a connected audience, just so that they know California State Parks exist. And we use that in the K-12 realm because it's a targeted audience, it's a captive audience. We can get to them because all the students in California are learning things that we are trying to share in California State Parks.
Now also, Brad, you kind of hit on it with the digital natives and the digital immigrants. You've been at the parks for a while. How has that changed since you first started at the parks?
Yeah, I mean, technology is evolving every day, and I can't keep up with it. For distance learning, it's really changed because when we first started distance learning, and I know the aquarium has a pretty active distance learning program as well, we were based in a studio, and we had expensive equipment, and you had a standalone machine that you had to use with a different remote to talk to a teacher that was 600 miles away, and it might have looked a little bit like Richard's beginning there, like I can't see you, you can't see me. But really, because technology has evolved so much now, we're equipping as many of our interpretive rangers as we can with a mobile device just so that they can access that K-12 classroom. We've repackaged it into live streaming on social media, just like your aquarium's doing tonight. And that's so that you can provide access to your resource to a global audience. There's no reason that right now you've got to be here to experience the aquarium. Of course, the idea is that you're going to entice that global audience to come and visit with really good content, really good personalities. But really, that's what it is. It breaks down to providing access, global access to an audience. So our department has seen and I think embraced that ability to to provide different things. I also credit the fact that I'm allowed to fail. I'm allowed to really, can you hear me? Can you see me? And do things much like how tech companies are built 10% at a time. We'll plan out and build what we do, but by no means is there a binder of information on how every step of it's going to go. Working with technology and trying to bring that out to the audience, you're going to fail, and I have a great amount of leeway.
Well, and that just reminds me of my experimentation with social media and things like that, because I post a winter storm warning on Facebook. I get 12 engagements. I post a picture of my dog. I get 10,000 engagements. Everybody loves the dog. Nobody cares that there's a winter storm coming. It's frustrating, but it is. It's part of the experimentation to find out what works, because sometimes it doesn't always work.
Dogs in the weather room.
Now that goes very well.
Perfect
Yes.
combination.
Yes. I don't think my boss would agree with that, but yes, I love that. So Danny, also I want to know what kind of STEM technology you use in the field.
Sure. So in the field, specifically with the show Exploration Nature Knows Best, well, first of all, the content of the show is really exciting because it is that bridge. It's between talking about nature and all the wonderful things that are happening in nature, but also looking at how nature is inspiring new technology and innovation. So we're meeting scientists and inventors who are creating everything from, concussion collars to prevent athletes from having concussions while they're playing sports, to, a person who created a ball that collects microfibers out of washing machines based on coral polyps. Like, the range is so wide, and I love that about the show. And so in the field, when we're shooting, I personally use social media as my tool to keep people, in tune with what we're shooting at the time, on behind the scenes. And so far, my audience has really enjoyed it, and I've watched my following grow quite significantly in the last year and a half because of that. And now that my audience is also associating my face with the show, it's all working in tandem. And like what you were saying about, whether or not you post a picture of your dog or just a stat, there's a totally different, realm of engagement. People want to know you. They want to feel connected to you. They want to be a part of your story. And so coming from a science background, it was a little challenging for me at first to want to put myself out there in that way. But then I understood that I needed to, because if someone's not in science and not understanding those facts, they want to be able to know me and to get to know me as someone that they can relate to, that they can listen to, and they feel excited to talk to or communicate with. And so that's my strategy, and I've seen, especially via Instagram, a lot of success with that, especially with live stories that are available now in both Instagram and Snapchat. You can bring somebody to wherever you are, living vicariously through you. And it's a lot of fun too. But it does require some work. And I have to find that really very fine balance, of not pulling out my phone way too much and being more in the moment.
Definitely. Now, Scott, with some of the high quality films that you have created, can you take us to some of the most remote areas in the world? And in your experience, have you seen an increased interest in the natural world from your viewers?
In terms of live streaming and that sort of thing, that can obviously be a challenge in a lot of the places that we work. But that said, covering us doing that and presenting all of that when we get back is certainly a big part of the industry. But as far as technology, that's always the trick. We're always hunting for the best tools that we can use, and for any individual sequence, a part of a larger natural history film, we're literally marrying different bits of technology to each to this string of 3 shots and this string of shots. Documentaries, we're lucky in that, unlike features, where you're married to a certain format, we can use all kind of different tools from certainly high-end big nice cameras to DSLRs for time lapses and other shots, and even GoPros and things like that for really risky. Lost a lot of GoPros over the years. They're pretty much expendable, cameras, I think about something like Phantom camera. It's been out for a little while now, but I've used it a number of times. When it was first coming out, it was barely out of military grade. That was sort of its origins, and it'll shoot 1,000 frames at 4K per image. So you're talking about massive, massive files. 4K is 4 times HD for anybody that doesn't know that, and it's
Which
and you're
is like
typically
4,000 lines of resolution, basically, right?
yeah, and at 1,000 frames per second, which typical film that you go to see is 24 frames per second. So you're talking about a bullet crossing a screen at that resolution. So one quick shot that in real time might be a second, can be 200 gigs. So these can be huge, huge, huge files. So it's a lot, and we're always finding the latest, greatest, or low light capabilities, or new tools for underwater, or low heat lighting, and all these different approaches to get out there and engage, basically to be able to present it to people in an engaging way and get them to like and love and protect.
Now, I want to stick with you a little bit more here. You're not just about entertaining us. You've helped with some policy change. Tell us a little bit about the CritterCam project.
So one of my first jobs at National Geographic, for a couple of years, I was a production specialist for a team that invented CritterCam, and by team, husband and wife. He was the inventor, and by the time I got there, he was largely in the field for something like 9 months a year, 10 months a year. So we really, he would come and go a lot. And then there was a mechanical and electrical engineer down in the bowels of Geographic that would piece these together, and we would customize cameras. Now, mind you, this is a little while back, so it was high 8. This is pre-GoPro. But the engineers would put this together, and we'd match it specifically to the animals that we'd be working with. In terms of the sampling for video, of when it turns on, when it turns off, all the parameters. Plus, it did everything that all the other data tools did. It would location, temperature, depth profiles. It was all marine animals we put CritterCam on. And so sharks, whales, seals, and sea turtles, we go around the world putting on that. And in Hawaii, the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, very, very far away, hundreds of miles from the populated islands. They're complete biopreserves. They'd freeze our clothes and everything before we go onto these islands because they don't want seeds or insects coming on there. And forever the policy was just hands off. Don't touch, just leave them alone, let them be. It's this relic population. There's 1,000, 1,500 left at the time. They had a crash, and they didn't know why because they were hands off. So they called us in. I headed a trip up there for about 2 months, living on the island. We put these cameras on the backs of monk seals with the biologists. We were always working with the biologists. We didn't just put them on anything. And it was fascinating. We did it we knew some of the individuals were deeper diving, and at that point it was only protected to 60 feet depth. And we assumed they'd go out on the reef and eat some of the millions of fish that are all over the reef. But a lot of them weren't doing that. And out of 5 deployments in that month, we'd catch the seals when they'd come back on the island and get the camera back. All of them were foraging in this black coral, which is a really random and isolated type of deep water coral, 400 feet. All of them were diving and foraging for octopus and one species of fish in that habitat. And they were just about to open up a black coral fishery in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, where they basically drag trawls across to harvest the coral because it's really valuable, make jewelry out of it. Those images alone were enough to shut it down and add protection out to greater depths in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, which was a pretty amazing thing to do. Typically, if you had a transmitter on the head of a seal, and he would go out, you'd mark everywhere that he went, and then you go out and you'd dive, and you'd do transects based on where he was active, and you'd try to assume what he was doing and interacting with. This was live, we could see the video of what these guys were doing and what they were feeding on. So it was immediate. So it was a great use of technology. It was
Definitely.
impressive.
And I have a question. Was that around 2003-ish?
It's gone on for a number of years. That trip that I went on was, that was 2000, 98 maybe. Okay. I was in my 20s, and yeah, it's a big trip for me.
Gotcha. So I just wanted to make the connection because when I was a junior in high school, I went to a field trip at a museum locally in Fort Lauderdale that was featuring a bunch of National Geographic explorers in residence. One of them was Dr. Heithaus, who was part of the Critter Cam team, and I remember he showed us footage from that, and that was the first time that I ever heard about Critter Cam.
Yeah.
And that's just amazing to me because it shows the power of media and how it's dispersed and it can reach so many people in such a short amount of time.
Right, right.
So that's
I think it
awesome.
also shows the power of the tools that scientists use and how important that is to expose students to that as well.
Yes.
Definitely. Now, Danny, you mentioned media and social media, and can you use that as a tool for ocean policy change?
Absolutely. I think that, as ocean policy becomes higher on the hierarchy of things that we're paying attention to these days, I've seen it happen within my own community, specifically working with youth. So through the organization that my mom and I co-founded back in 2008, Big Blue and You in Miami, we've worked with thousands of young people who are interested in the ocean, who love the ocean, and find ways to, spread the word about the ocean. And that moves on, further toward policy. How can young people advocate for ocean policy? And so with 2 partners, we created an initiative called Sea Youth Rise Up back in 2016, and it's SEA, Sea Youth Rise Up. And we were looking to find some of these rock star young people around the country who were really standing up for the ocean and understood the importance of advocating certain policies that would either affect their local community or nationally. And so when we created Sea Youth Rise Up, we selected 7 students from around the nation, including actually 2 international students. We chose a student from the Bahamas as well as from Canada, and we flew them to New York City and Washington, D.C. during the week of World Oceans Day, which is June 8th. And that year, obviously President Obama's last year in office, he was the first to establish the premier marine protected area in the U.S. Atlantic, right? So the very first MPA, and that was up in the Northeast. And so these students went to President Obama's Council of Environmental Quality while we were in DC. We had a sit-down meeting with the council, the head of the council, and she took about 20 minutes to listen to what these students had to say and why they believe that MPAs were extremely important for their future. And a couple weeks later, President Obama announced that the MPA was established. And so it was almost like the feather in the cap because these students, they told us afterward that they had really made an impact on their final decision. And man, I get goosebumps thinking about it, it's really amazing. Just giving young people a seat at the table. And that was all initiated because of social media. We found those students because we put out a blast online and we talked to many, many partners to spread the word where we were able to find those dynamic voices. And so that's how it all came together.
That's awesome. Now, Brad, I and probably everybody in this room is real interested to hear this. Do you think that a screen can provide us with the same physical benefits or calming blue mind feeling that you would actually get being in nature?
I guess, the obvious answer is no, right? But I have to go back to how do you even know that nature exists? And can it heighten your awareness when you're there? I grew up surfing on Long Island, and the only way to check the surf was to drive 20 minutes to the beach, right? But now I live in San Diego, California, and I can access high-definition cameras of 20 different spots and get excited to go to the best one, right? So, no, being in the ocean and surfing or seeing a dolphin or, just being immersed in the ocean, it's a multi-sensory thing. I think technology is moving closer to multi-sensory. I don't think it'll ever, actually be like what it is to walk through the redwood forest. But again, I think we need to use these tools to provide access to a larger audience so that they're prepared and they're excited and, that they want to visit. And then, hopefully support policy. So it's all just a part of the package, I think.
Definitely. And Scott, same loaded question for you.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that it's not the same. But same thing. Providing that spark, providing inspiration to go out and see things that you don't know, driving you to dig deeper on different topics. I grew up watching documentaries and all those types of films and magazines as well, and they feed that urge to go out and explore. I don't think it replaces it. I do think that done in a unique way, some of it can enhance. You can get some of those benefits that Richard was talking about. I think about, what was it called? Discovery, when HD first came out, and we were all, wow, seeing really sharp images going across a Discovery Channel. A friend of mine started a program called Sunrise Earth. And it was nothing like nature documentaries. It was basically, they would go to some gorgeous location, a spring in Florida, crystal clear water, and the sun would be just coming up, so it's beautifully backlit, and you'd be watching. And it was timed to come on early in the morning when you just got up and you have your cup of coffee and you're trying to, you're just about to get the day started, but you're not crazy yet. You're in that, you got time to breathe. And it was amazing. It was, one shot could be 2 to 3 minutes long, and then they'd slow fade to another, and they would just put you in this place. But it became like a substitute window, because it wasn't set up like, your classic documentary or something where it's driven and there's a pace to it and everything. So it just felt like you were looking out a window, and the sounds were incredible and the sights were incredible, and it was calming. You had a benefit. You weren't necessarily glued to every moment, but it was there, and it was sort of feeding. So I do think that there are ways to approach it that was a crazy concept at the time, because who's going to watch 3-minute shots of literally just a static,
I'll see your sunrise and raise you an otter. So we took our distance learning programs and repackaged that technology and talent and content that we have into live streaming on social media, which is more likely known as Facebook Live or Periscope or YouTube Live. And one of our most popular live streams was sunrise with sea otters. And it was maybe 75,000 views. And I'd say the majority of the comments that came through for that was, thank you, I need this so much right now, right? This is great, People from the East Coast, it was already, 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. People from the West Coast, people from all over the world just were saying, how great is it that I can do this? Now, is the fear they're never going to want to go see a sunrise in California again? I don't think so, But I think it's providing that little bit of respite. For us, that's what it meant for them, right, that moment. So.
Yeah, when we're dealing with so much digital noise, being bombarded every day with so much, it's really important to have those windows to look into and escape for a second.
And I think places like the aquarium and state parks and the work that you do, we have that content that should be and is being elevated online. I think that there's a real call from Silicon Valley to put more than just cat videos on somebody's live streaming platform, right? And we see that in state parks. A lot of the companies that we work with, there's value in our content. And while the monetization of it may not be, it's zero for us in real dollars, but the branding that the parks gets out of it, there's value in that. And the fact that we can put, this balanced content online, it's really important for us.
Definitely. Now, I want to flip this around to the crowd. Many here in the room are probably baby boomers or Generation X. When the term millennial is used, it typically describes those born between 1983 and the mid-90s. So, how many of you in this audience would describe yourself as a millennial? Excellent, excellent. Now, the next generation, Generation Z, that refers to those born between the mid-90s and the mid-2000s. Now, Danny, do you think we're at a turning point right now? What types of changes are you seeing, especially in the younger viewers?
Interesting question. I think we're still kind of figuring that out. I've talked to a lot of Generation Zs, and they don't even want to have a label, first of all. They're like, what? Why are you even doing this? But of course, they're digital natives. But I find that they're a bit more skeptical when it comes to looking at content and very specific, right? So they almost know how to navigate, like I was saying earlier, that digital noise. They'll go directly to what they want. And so I think that leaves a lot of room for content creators to come up with new content that's very focused, right? So for example, with YouTube, I went to a YouTuber conference a couple of years ago, and they had mentioned that out of all the different types of videos that are going up online, which, by the way, 4 hours of content on YouTube is uploaded every minute. And so with that, those who were posting educational videos, surprisingly, were like on the rise. The fastest growing category of YouTube video are educational videos and how-to videos, because people, like the Generation Zers, are going directly to those platforms to find what they want, and then they're out. You know, so like, but they're still consuming the same or if not more content, you know, than average. So, you know, it's a really, I don't know, I'm excited for this generation because I think that they're able to have more discernment about how they're going to consume their content and do it in a way that makes sense.
They're still getting the content. I mean,
right.
So we bought 360 cameras, which, you know, off the shelf can take 360 photos and videos. And I handed them one to a person who would consider themselves a digital immigrant, and I handed one to a digital native. They opened the box, and it came with no instructions on how to use it. So the digital immigrant was like, well, great, where's the instructions, right?
Yeah.
And the other person said, I'm just going to go to YouTube and figure this out.
Figure it out, exactly.
And there's no right or wrong way. And, you know, I might learn differently than somebody who's of my age on this stage. But providing that content, an educational video or whatever you're trying to do in the most relevant way to that audience is really key for organizations to keep moving forward. It's my fear that I don't want us to become irrelevant. I don't want interpretation to become irrelevant because we consider the fact that, you know, we don't use Facebook as a badge of honor. You know, our interpretive rangers need to be on Facebook. They need to be on YouTube.
So that's kind of where we are now, and that kind of leads us into the final question here. Where are we going? 10, 20 years from now? What's your vision?
For technology as it relates to nature?
Exactly.
Everything's getting smaller. Everything's getting in the camera realm. I'll stick to that and let you guys address some of the others. But it's all shrinking. It's all becoming more accessible at higher quality. I think one of the biggest things we're going to see is going to be drastically improved night capabilities, low light capabilities, which is going to open up a whole other realm of how you can shoot and what you shoot and what you see and film and talk about. But it's all changing so incredibly fast. It's amazing to see some of the, even within, I saw in the 10 to 20 year space, contact lens interactive, even if it's talking about where to focus and somehow read with your device. That's something that they're
kind of like on an airplane. The dials are on the window.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So you know, it's going to be impressive, but it's happening very, very fast and super high quality. The quality is going to be through the roof. So,
and Danny, what do you see?
Well, first off, I'm very excited about the possibilities with augmented reality and virtual reality. I think having those immersive technologies are really going to be helpful in bringing folks into nature and exposing them. But secondly, I would say it's about diversity and seeing more people of different backgrounds coming out and enjoying nature as well. I believe in 2011, the National Park Service, as well as University of Wyoming, conducted a study that found that 1 in 5 people who go to a national park are non-white, and then out of 1 of 10 would be Hispanic. So like those numbers, that's back in 2011, they have to change, right? As our country continues to grow and continues to become more diverse, I think it's important that we are able to have people telling different stories, different experiences. And from an African-American perspective, you know, we're not far removed, obviously, from days where we were legally unable to partake or enjoy certain places that were pristine and beautiful, right? Even beaches. For example, in Miami, where Big Blue and You host our annual event called Artsy, where we bring artists and scientists together to talk about the ocean and celebrate the ocean. We hosted at a park called Historic Virginia Key Beach Park. And it's on Virginia Key, which is an island just off of downtown Miami. And back in 1945, that park was established as the park for people of color. We weren't allowed on Miami Beach or any other beach in Miami. And so folks before then, at that point, there wasn't even a causeway to get there by car. So people would either swim or jump on a fishing boat and catch a ride to get over there. And over the years, they created a carousel and a miniature train and all these amenities that made the beach so special and so, important. So it's a big part of our community. And those places obviously hold historical significance, but that story should never happen again, right? Every open space, every beautiful, natural place that we cherish should be available to every single person, and those barriers can come down. So I think it's about visibility, showing people that this is accessible for you. I think also, just providing opportunities, right? More summer camps, more, just bring people out, and every single person who loves nature or has a place that's special to them, try to invite someone that you know from your community, from your neighborhood. Take them out, show them, expose them to it, and I think wonders will happen from there.
Awesome. And Brad, where do you see the California parks headed?
It's funny, but I want to mimic the same thing. I think whether it's AR or VR or whatever, the mixed reality, whatever's coming out, it's about democratizing the interpretation. It's about giving other people voices. So I'm excited about, how technology can kind of spread out the messaging. We've told narratives for so long, in a museum about this, but really, maybe when Dani goes there, it's not the story that she was looking for, or that's not being told. The Smithsonian has 3% of all the artifacts and things in its collection actually on display. Well, what about the 97% of things that the American public owns because it's the Smithsonian, but they don't see and they don't know about? So tools that provide opportunities for a larger audience to see more of collections or more things, that's really, I think, where I'd like to see it go.
Awesome. Well, let's give our panelists a round of applause. Now, I do have some of the crowd questions, so we'll go ahead and answer those, and we'll just kind of do this. Whoever wants to answer it, fire away. So, let's see. Are you always plugged in?
Yes. No, I am. I don't know as you can see, I have my phone up here with me. It never leaves my hands, but I love it because it's my connection to the world.
I'm usually not when I'm surfing, but there's a new camera out that you wear a beacon and it'll actually track you while you're surfing, so you can. Wow. Which is cool because I don't have any very good pictures of me in the water, so I was like, yeah, look good. So I guess that's kind of plugged in, but yeah, I'm plugged in quite a bit.
For the most part, but I do try not to. I do try to put it down for periods of time. And then on location, actually, I so appreciate it when I am, because I can actually take photos and videos or something and send them home and sort of maintain that connection, which is only getting to be easier and easier. So that's important. Staying connected that way when you're away.
How long are you away from the family at a time?
Usually it's not an incredibly long. 2-3 week is a pretty big stretch, but there's been a month and a half, sort of in that zone, which is a really, really long time. I try not to do this, especially with age of my kids.
Exactly. Let's see. One of our followers wants to know, what's one type of technology that you couldn't live without?
I don't know. I would have to say probably my cell phone. I mean, really, I rejected it for a long time, to be honest. I think before I got an iPhone, I wasn't too keen on having it around me, but I'm obsessed with taking pictures. I love video, and I love to capture moments, just for my own memory. So I would say my iPhone.
The iPhone does so much. It does everything. So smartphones, not just the iPhone.
I think video communications is really, I think if you ask me in a couple of years, it'll probably be something I can't live without. People aren't making phone calls anymore. Last night I was walking around downtown, and people came bombing out of some restaurant, and it was maybe a grandma, the aunt, and a brother or something. We're literally FaceTiming with the granddaughter on the sidewalk, right? And 15 minutes later, somebody else walked by FaceTiming. So it's funny. I think that like we couldn't live without phone calls or phone communications. I think video communications is probably going to be, on my list of things that it's just day to day. We do it all the time.
Okay, and now we're going to go ahead and open it up to your questions. So if anybody has a question, we've got some folks wandering around with a microphone. Anything you've wondered?
Has the game started?
I believe that's 727,
All right,
I think
good,
I
right.
saw.
I thought that might have been a question. I don't know.
Hi.
Preempting.
So, thank you so much for your panel today. It was really educational and informative. My question is, at what point are we so connected to capturing and sharing the moment that we are losing the experience? I love technology, and I'm a huge fan of storytelling, and I see the benefit for the people viewing it. But I question that for myself. Like, when am I not experiencing this moment because I'm so busy capturing it or sharing it?
Every single time. I mean, it's from my perspective. I mean, it's what I do all the time, and it's it's comical. There are definitely times where I've thought about it. You're so engaged in this, and you look up, and there's the tiger's actually really close, or the shark, or the whatever it is, and you get a disconnect. You're almost as if you're watching television, as you're paying attention to this and operating a number of things. And so there's definitely, but just day to day, if you're paying attention to something else and doing it right, you're not fully engaged in the moment. So, but it's there forever.
And I would say maybe what you're saying is somebody's capturing something, but they're doing that for a reason. And maybe they're going to share it with people when they go somewhere, or maybe they're sharing it live. And that's their version of storytelling. We used to take pictures, right? Or VHS, or maybe you're an artist and you paint. I'm sure you're going to go and enjoy it, but I feel like don't devalue the fact that what younger people are doing, which is I think what you're getting at, is they're creating their story, they're creating their narrative. And don't get angry at the technology just because maybe it's better than what we had, but I think we need to embrace the fact that this is what they're using for storytelling or creation. And I think, there's still parental guidance or rules and regulations in places that can still, hopefully try to guide you or remind you that you should step back and learn and listen and do, engage those other senses. But, I'm okay with, if somebody's on a tour in a redwood forest and they're taking lots of photos or videos. I mean, because that's their storytelling opportunity. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think on a personal level, I mean, for example, even just today, I was with my mom at the aquarium, and we were walking around, and she looked at me and said, okay, no phones for 1 hour, right? And it's just simple things like that. I think it's creating boundaries. We're getting to the point now where we have to make those decisions and just say, what works for you, and how much time are you really going to spend behind your phone, and when are you going to put it away, when are you going to turn it off? You have to decide that for yourself, and what makes you feel happy. Because, definitely, I don't believe we should be totally consumed in looking at our screens. We have to find that balance.
And the tiny little 2 cents I'd add, you talked about that's how they're telling their story, that's how they're creating that narrative. That is one thing I would add, is a little off, but that is one thing that won't change. Technology is changing constantly, and it is happening faster and faster and faster. The fundamental thing that's not changing is storytelling. It's still about, for me, it's still applying just the right tool to tell the story the way you want to tell it. So there may be better tools or newer tools or whatever it is, but it's still about the most effective way to kind of get that across. And that's a fundamental thing that goes back to the origins of humanity and,
exactly,
and
from
not
the
going
drawings
anywhere.
On the cave walls.
It's not going anywhere.
Not going anywhere.
Okay, we've got another question.
I wanted to go back to what you said about virtual reality. You just mentioned that briefly. Is there work doing the kind of thing that you do using virtual reality? Because it seems like what Scott does in diving would be absolutely perfect for somebody like that, somebody to experience something that they probably will never experience. And the question is, how do you, I mean, do we have the technology to do that based on what you're doing in California?
Yeah, I mean, we've done live streaming in 360 underwater with the Monterey Bay Aquarium as a partner, which basically the nuts and bolts of it is it can be put into a headset and be virtual reality based. We're doing it right now. The next level for us is how to create virtual reality environments for students to engage with us in virtual reality. And I'm not sure if that's really the tool that we want to use, because what we're doing with 30 students at a time talking to a ranger who's kayaking above the kelp forest, we're still using great educational tools. We're saying, turn to your neighbor and talk about what we're seeing here. Or have the teacher, pick some students and let's, show how long a kelp, kelp can be. So virtual reality, I think, has the potential to isolate people. And once we get past these goggles that you see everybody in the commercials are coming out, that's when I think it'll be a little bit of a game changer for virtual reality. Mm-hmm. But right now, it's a very isolating experience, but we can do it. Would I do it? Not as much right now.
I agree in the VR space. It's and same thing with 3D.
Yeah.
All of these kind of come along, but I feel like, and this is just my opinion, but there's plenty of people that would argue this another way. But I feel like as long as you have to put something on, that it's only going so far.
Yep.
So that's
and I think the VR tech world will tell you that.
Yeah.
That's what everybody's racing to figure out a better way to deliver VR.
Right.
Okay, any more questions? Got one right there.
This is specifically for Brad, and I guess you guys can answer too, but specifically, do you work a lot outside of California with other groups, or maybe, I know you said you work with Monterey Bay, but are you looking for more connections outside of California?
For content or for an audience? Yeah, so because we're California State Parks, I'm focused on the state park effort in California. We work with Monterey Bay Aquarium because they really are, kind of a gold standard in social media, and they have great personalities and technology through their partnerships that we kind of employ. In terms of audience, our connection with Microsoft Education's Skype in the Classroom has been huge for us. So that opens up California's resources and the stories of California to a global audience. So just as a quick example, you've all probably heard of Ellis Island, right?
Ellis Island, New York.
New York,
yep.
Right? Immigration station. How many of you have heard of Angel Island in San Francisco Bay? Okay, I got one hand in the back. Good. And that's okay. I mean, it's a California state park. It's an island in the middle of San Francisco Bay. It's the bigger island next to Alcatraz, which people always visit. On the eastern edge of the island is the Ellis Island Immigration Station, which is in operation from 1910 to 1940. And it was put in place basically to try to exclude Asian Americans from entering this country. And that's a story that a lot of people in this room don't even know. So for us to be able to tell that story through our connection with Microsoft Education, Skype in the Classroom, to have an immigration story on there that can go to a global audience, where immigration is a global issue, and California can help tell that story, is very powerful for us.
Any others? Question? Here we have one up front.
She could ask Scott. You guys are married already, right?
I just wanted to bring up, you were talking about connecting with the audience emotionally, if they're not necessarily interested or not being brought in by the science. You haven't talked about behind the scenes and how much people are interested in watching you filming and interacting. And it sort of brings in what all of you guys do. But I just was wondering if you wanted to talk about that, the last episode of Big Pacific, and how popular that was.
Yeah, it's true. Some of the films we work on are straight, their behavioral, straight natural history. The documentaries, a lot of you know the style. But in other cases, people want to see sort of the challenges, the things that you overcome, the failures, and frankly, just some of the crazy things that go down. And people are definitely drawn to that. It's a whole another thing. And when done well, it's very engaging. They did get some of the highest ratings off of that 5th hour on this last series that I worked on for PBS. And so, that human element, that human interaction is always a big thing.
I think authentic content in general it's on the upswing, right? Mm-hmm. You don't necessarily have to be a professional interpreter to go walk through the redwoods anymore and give a tour. We can't stop people from live streaming themselves walking through, Redwood State Park. There's people want that. They want that authentic experience, and I think that's because in interpretation, we're going away from the sage on the stage approach to education or interpretation to the guide on the side. And how can you help facilitate that story, or how can I help reveal the natural world to you? And that all goes down to authentic content.
I think that's a really exciting area, especially for young people who are maybe in college right now, who are either about to graduate and are looking for what their next step will be, whether or not they want to continue with graduate research and really stick with the science, but also become science storytellers. We need science storytellers. We need a whole new generation of them. And I hope that, especially with the power of social media, that people will see the opportunity there. Just being like a guide on the side and being willing to share your passion, to share what you know already. You may not be an expert, but you know something, so share it, right? And so my hope is to see, again, a whole new generation of young people who are interested in that career path and are willing to be the disseminators of that really important, valid knowledge that can be shared widely.
So last year we went to Kanab, Utah. We're going to several of the parks in that area, beautiful area. And talking to the park services, a lot of the park rangers were saying that they were having trouble keeping up with the amount of tourism that was coming. Every time that there was a Peter Lake photo in social media, they would get like a 200% uptick in tourism for the rest of the year. I was wondering if nationally, if the park services have been discussing that and formulating some kind of game plan so that you can democratize or have some kind of virtual reality for these paths that, you can only get like 5 people per week. So
Sure.
you can go on these trails without destroying them.
Sure. So I work for California State Parks, first of all. So National Park Service probably has an approach to it. But certainly it's all a part of our management plan. But really, again, what's the difference between somebody who posts something on social media and more people visit, and the guidebook that came out in 1994 that had that same information in it, right? It's just that there's more people. But yeah, and I think what example you're talking about, and we have to keep up with and be knowledgeable about and be a part of that conversation on social media or other platforms so that we can be seen as the experts. For a long time we didn't respond to things, and we have to have a plan for responding. And those plans will change. So the real important thing is just being knowledgeable of it, knowing where things are being put out there. And then having people on your staff, that are cognizant and speak in that language so that they can engage with that audience in a different way. Because like I said, it's the same thing as the guidebook that came out 30 years ago and everybody went to the hidden beach, right? And now everybody's Instagramming hidden beach. And we had policy for it then, and we'll have policy for it now.
I'm going to be a bit of a devil's advocate because it says here, from gigabytes to nature heights. If we continue to go on gigabytes, how do we get young people back to the nature heights? Ms. Washington, you touched upon that when you recounted us about your youth. And how are we going to do that?
Well, my approach is that you put the content on that screen so that they know it exists. How do you do that? Right. How do you go from there to there? Well, again, we talk to students in a K-12 environment. We get them for 45 minutes. The hope is that they go home and they spark that interest with their parents. You know, having a presence on social media and enticing and inviting them out. That's how we do it. I mean, how did you know to take your kids somewhere? You learned about it, you took them there. How did you get them there? You had a car. We deal with a lot of people in inner city in California that don't have vehicles. So then we start to branch out to how do we work with public transit systems. Just recently, we're looking into funding for how to take this digital experience and turn it physical. But again, 3.1 million students in California, even if we had every one of them visit a park, I don't know if we'd have anything for them to do. We've got to plan, we've got to work with partners, we've got to work with private industry, we've got to work with public agencies to get more people out there. The technology is the introduction, and that's where we're at right now because it is just so evolving so fast.
I believe in the power of field trips. I mean, touching on the transportation issue for those who do not have access to efficient transportation to get out to these remote places. I mean, field trips have changed my life. They really did. And so having opportunities to get outside like that and to go with your school is really important. So for you, sir, I think advocating for more funding for school districts to allocate toward field trips would be a really strong choice. And for example, I've worked as a naturalist in addition to my other jobs, in Miami at this place called the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Biscayne Nature Center. And it's on Key Biscayne. It's a small nature center, but they've been there. They started out in a hot dog trailer, but now it's a full-fledged building. And over the last 25 years, our nature center has served 2 million children from South Florida. Just coming in for a day field trip for 4 hours, where we take them out into the seagrass bed and we show them what's out there, the juvenile animals that are living there, the mangrove forest, and taking them on a hike. And I meet, from when I started in 2008, I'm still meeting adults now that have young children that are coming as preschoolers saying, I came here as a high school student and I loved it. And so that to me is the best, I guess, lowest hanging fruit that we can start with to help really get kids outside on those nature hikes.
And I'd say when it's functioning at its best, I mean, my job is to inspire. It's to show people some things, even if you had an active parent that's pulling kids out and going to places, you don't want to go to all the places that I've gone, definitely. But to inspire somebody to get out and explore. It's a big, amazing world, and go to these natural places that are so impressive and so important and disappearing constantly. So that's when I was a kid watching documentaries or looking at National Geographic or those types of things, it's getting the information out. It's hopefully lighting a spark and also setting a good example and educating and entertaining. Sort of at best, all sort of at the same time to try to inspire people to go and see some of these incredible places.
Awesome. Well, with that, I think we're going to wrap things up. Please, another warm round of applause for our panelists. So I do have a couple notes for you here. If you are attending the Watershed Dinner that's coming up next, we want to encourage you to continue the conversation with our panelists there. Please follow the ushers that are going to be across the lobby and up the staircase into the Carolina Ballroom. That's where you'll check in. Please, those pictures that you've taken here, post those. Gotta keep the technology theme going. Go ahead and post those if you've taken some pictures, and you can hashtag them. Hashtag them with hashtag HLLfinale. And thank you to our live stream viewers that are joining us as well for tuning in. Thank you to everybody.
Can I
Basketball
make
game.
a shameless plug?
You sure can.
Nature Knows Best. If you'd like to view the show, it's on Hulu and Amazon Prime, so you can see it online. It's called Exploration with an X, no E at the front. Exploration, Nature Knows Best. And I have some stickers up here too, so if anybody wants some stickers, come up and see me. I'd love to give some to you. So thank you all again. This was really an honor and privilege to be up here with you guys. Thank you.
You too.
And Scott mentioned it, basketball game.
Basketball game.
We've got the basketball game. It will be on in the ballroom. If you're not familiar, College of Charleston is playing right now out in San Diego. So the game will be on, and we'll all be pulling for the Cougars, I hope. If not, I'll have to see you out the door. But once again, thank you so much.